Episode 33. And today we are going back to philosophy and discussing a philosopher I think everybody has at least heard of before, being Friedrich Nietzsche. And I always have trouble saying his name the correct way, but that is who we are discussing. And I'm joined today with my co host.
Yeah, yeah, it's Friedrich Nietzsche. Uh, is I suppose is the more common way of pronouncing it.
Yes, he is German. Not that that means much, but it is has the German pronunciation to the name. So yeah.
Yeah.
So the first kind of question I wanted to ask, because you're big into philosophy yourself, and I've kind of into philosophy. I wouldn't necessarily say I know a whole bunch of things yet, as I'm still kind of learning about it. But were you ever somebody who found the philosopher interesting, or did you always just kind of prefer somebody else? Because a lot of people tend to pick him as somebody that got them interested.
Well, I'll have to say that I personally, when I look at Nietzsche's works, because I've been in groups of people where they read different stuff and where Nietzsche was more popular. Among those people, for me, Nietzsche was always someone that I disliked in some ways. Not to say that I have anything personal against him or anything like that. Um, so we actually tried to have someone with a more positive view on Nietzsche on the show in order to have a more different outlook. However, that person couldn't make it, and the person that person recommended instead also couldn't make it. However, I do think that Nietzsche does mean a lot of things to a lot of different people, and liking Nietzsche's work and agreeing with Nietzsche isn't necessarily the purpose of his work, which is also something that lends itself to the philosophical value as well, or anti-philosophical value, if you because there's a number of different perspectives you can have on it. But with Nietzsche's work, sometimes the value of it isn't found in agreeing with it, but also is found in disagreeing with it. And in that way, he is relevant not only to people that consider his work particularly relevant, but also to people who consider his ideas wrong and irrelevant.
Right, I could definitely see that perspective in what you're saying there, especially when you start talking about a lot of his what I call life lessons he gives out in his philosophy. He has his certain ideas of philosophy that he explores, but one of those is I guess you could shorthand it to being basically life lessons, what he thinks you should shoot for, and and we're probably going to get into more details of that later. But I can definitely see what you're saying about that. I will say that in my experience with excuse me with Nietzsche before, I would say that I heard about him, but didn't necessarily look into him that much because in high school we had a philosophy class. Is basically what it was, and I don't think our teacher particularly liked him. So when we did talk about the philosopher, we kind of brushed over it. So my experience with him isn't as in depth as I think a lot of people's, but he is very interesting to read about and to explore because a lot of his ideas uh, make you think and seem to be based in some logical sense, but you may disagree with something he says later on. Is kind of the way, and we're going to get into some of those details later. But that's kind of been my experience uh, with Nietzsche.
Yeah. I think something that's interesting about this is, of course, that the time frame he's writing in the 1800s. He's he's coming after Darwin. He's coming after Marx. He's coming after the German idealists who became pretty famous, influential. Um, so you can see the philosophical atmosphere at the time is heavily influenced by Kant and also by Hegel, who came afterwards. And of course, Hegel was influential on Marx and on other a lot of philosophers at the time in Germany, particularly, but also in other areas. Um, so I think Nietzsche is very much, I would say, a man of the times in that he tries to look at some contemporary developments in how people understood the world, and he tries to point out then inconsistencies that people have between those contemporary developments in understanding and the more traditionalist outlook that some people have.
Right, for sure. He definitely explores a lot of the concepts of what it means to be human, really, and what your value should be in that process. Like a lot of people who generally know about Nietzsche would say that they know about him being atheist, and they know about him saying that, it's up to you to reach your potential. I think that's the general gist people get that know very little about him or just have heard about him type of thing. They know that he didn't believe in God, and they know that his beliefs were that you can become uh, a superhuman if you seek out to do so. And seeking out to do so isn't easy, but it's something we should all shoot for. And that's kind of a very Spark Notesy version of part of who Nietzsche was.
Yeah, Nietzsche believed that in light of the theories of Darwin and of other scientists that were publishing ideas at the time, that the older religious ideas that people were holding on to were inconsistent and that they should be discarded and that they were holding society back. Um, not just society, but individuals within that society, more specifically from realizing their full potential in some ways. And so his ideas about Christianity, you can see similar to those, although not exactly the same. You see other people putting out, for example, Feuerbach talks about how he gives a more, you could say, naturalistic idea on the origin of Christianity, a more materialist notion on the origin of Christianity as a religion, because at this time people were going away from the supernatural position held among the conservative circles and going into a more materialist, naturalistic perspective and theories on the origin of Christianity. So these theories had a lot to do with how society of the time led to people looking at certain values and preferring certain things over other things. And so Nietzsche, in some ways, agrees with the British historian Edward Gibbon about how a big theory of Gibbon's is that the Christian morality and ethics made the Roman Empire weaker at its end and contributed to its collapse. Now, historians today think that it's a lot more complex than that and would likely ascribe a lot of different factors to that. But one thing that's very important is Nietzsche very much likes to contrast the what he considers to be the values and virtue system of the pre-Christian Romans and the pagans over against that of the Christians, and he views the Roman virtues as being based on people who are self-realized, self-actualized, people that are powerful, people with ambition, people that are the ruling class, not simply because it is something that they inherited, but because it is something that they actively went for. And I think that this, of course, does correspond a bit with an understanding of Roman culture, where in Roman culture it was important that rather than relying simply on the fame of your ancestors, that you had to accomplish something yourself as a man in order to be worthy um, of your ancestors in that way. Now, this is in contrast